Yo, what's good everyone? We just got the Natlan livestream and they revealed Kinich is coming in the second half of 5.0. Let's look at his kit, builds and teams. So what does he do and how do we play him? Simply put, use his skill to enter the Night Soul Blessing state for 10 seconds which makes him glow green. This attaches himself to an enemy with a grapple hook and instead of walking, he'll now circle around the enemy. In this state, he gets a meter that we fill up with Night Soul points. There are 3 ways to get these points. Firstly, we get 2 every second. Next, we get 3 for using normal attacks in this state which will deal small dendro damage. Finally, we get 7 for using his skill against an enemy affected by burning or burgeon damage. When the meter's full, we can use his skill to deal big dendro damage and reset the meter. Okay, to summarize everything, use his skill to attach to an enemy, spam normals to deal small damage and build points on his meter. When the meter's full, use his skill to deal big damage. Use his skill to attach, spam normals, use skill, spam normals, use skill, and so on. If the enemy is affected by burning or burgeon, you get to use his skill more often. His burst summons a dragon to deal AoE dendro damage at intervals. His passive gives him a stack every time a teammate triggers a Night Soul burst. For those that don't know what that means, it's just when a Natlan character deals elemental damage. It won't be useful until we get some Natlan characters that synergize with him properly. Technically speaking, you could run him with Kachina and Mualani, but the team would be garbage. Upon dealing Geo damage with Kachina and Hydro damage with Mualani, you'd get 2 stacks, 1 from each of them. He can get up to 2 stacks and each one increases his skill damage a bit more. When you use his skill, it consumes the stacks. Again, don't worry about that until we get further into Natlan. For pros and cons, his skill damage is a big positive in his kit. Do you remember we were saying you want to build the meter up to use his skill for a big damage attack? You're gonna get a few of those off every rotation and they're gonna hit hard. It'll make him a very strong choice for single target content. The next advantage is that he's our first dedicated burning on-fielder. Emily's a strong unit, but she doesn't have too many synergies right now, and she's relying more on raw damage. Kinich gives her that synergy, which is good for those who pulled her. What's even better is Kinich has a new craftable weapon in Natlan. It's going to give him a lot of attack, as well as even more skill damage. With it being a new region, there'll be a lot of characters you want, so having the opportunity to save some primo gems on the weapon is a nice bonus. An advantage that may potentially get overlooked is his ability to grapple in the Natlan overworld. Basically, you can interact with some dendro dinosaur thing and gain the ability to grapple onto hooks, but Kinich's grapple ability is useful for more than just grappling onto hooks. You can also use it for jumping high in exploration. Think Kazuha's skill but on crack. For his downsides, his passive does restrict him somewhat to being run with pyro units. Given the fact most of his damage comes from his skill, not being able to use it as much in teams of other dendro reactions like spread is a shame, but at least it's not as restrictive as someone like Nalu. As powerful as she is, you can run him outside of pyro teams, which we'll look at soon. They're just not as strong. A disadvantage of his kit which I'm not a fan of is that he benefits a lot from Bennett, but his playstyle of circling around the enemy means he'll be leaving Bennett circle a lot, especially against enemies that move around. Hopefully Natlan gives us some teammates for him where this isn't an issue. Another thing about the grapple mechanic is getting caught in terrain. While the gimmick of grappling to enemies and circling around them looks fun in an open and flat area, I can imagine getting caught on walls and hills is going to be a pain. I think Kinich will be fine, but if you'd rather save your primo gems for someone else, you're not missing out on a must-ball character. In terms of weapons, his signature will obviously be his best. R5 Serpent Spine will be his next best, which is a relief for long-term players who already obtained it from the Battle Pass. For free-to-play players, there's a new Natlan craftable with a high base attack, also gives attackers the substat, as well as 32% skill damage, which is solid for Kinich. If you wanted to experiment and try quicken teams even though he's definitely not designed to be a spread DPS, you could give him an elemental mastery weapon like Mailed Flower for extra attack and elemental mastery, or Rain Slasher for elemental mastery and an extra 36% damage for his whole kit. If you have Makaira Aquamarine, which is the Sumeru Gacha Claymore, you can give him and his teammates extra attack scaling off his elemental mastery. His artifacts are easy. The new Natlan DPS set, Obsidian Codex, will be his best. It's going to give him 15% extra damage and 40% crit rate. Given the fact he ascends with crit damage, he's already in a good spot. If his HP is fluctuating a lot, for example in Farina teams, he can hold Marashose Hunter for crit rate. Until you get a 4-piece of a new set, you can use a combo of 2 pieces like Golden Troop for skill damage, Deepwood for dendro damage, or a standard attack 2-piece. Now for my favourite part of the video, let's start cooking some delicious teams. With him getting more Night Soul points in Burning and Burgeon teams, let's look at them first. Bennett gives attack which all teammates benefit from and can also hold the new support set, Scroll of a Hero. This gives everyone 12% elemental damage as opposed to Noblesse giving everyone 20% attack which they already have enough of. Kinich's finally going to give us a solid on-field Dendro unit for Emily teams, which is good for her versatility. Emily's also a good holder of Deepwood, which is something to consider for Kinich teams. If you wanted to swap Emily out for an Anemo unit like Kazuha, Sucrose or Ventivo, you could do, and that'll buff Xiangling's damage. I don't recommend it though, because I think this will make the team weaker. You could also swap in Farina for some Vapes and maybe even the occasional Burgeon. She's going to give everyone extra damage too. My biggest issue with this team is figuring out who, if anyone, is going to hold Deepwood. It will bring Farina or Xiangling's damage a lot lower, and Bennett won't be able to keep uptime on it throughout Kinich's entire field time. Swapping out Xiangling for Dia would solve that issue, and she could hold Deepwood. You could also keep Xiangling in but swap out Bennett for Baiju and give him Deepwood. For Burgeon, we'll go with Toma as the trigger, although you could use Dia if you want to. Whichever one you go for can hold Deepwood, which will mean the Burgeon damage is lower, but Kinich will deal more damage. You'll want one of either Xingqiu or Yelan in the Hydro slot, and then for the last slot you can either go for the other of Yelan or Xingqiu, or you could get an extra Dendro unit in there. It's worth noting that Xingqiu could hold Deepwood, but I personally would rather give it to the Pyro characters. I don't use them as often as Xingqiu, and I don't want to swap his set around with us still not having artifact loadouts. Come on Hoyoverse, pull your heads out your asses. If you're going for double Dendro, I like Nahida for AoE and Emily for single target. Now we're going to talk about a Bloom team, which I know Kinich isn't designed for, but bear with me. The logic of existing Bloom teams is to apply as much Dendro and Hydro as possible, buff the team's elemental mastery, and you'll deal more damage with the Blooms themselves being the DPSs, and the damage of the characters will be an afterthought. With Kinich Bloom teams, they're an inverted version, where we're focusing on dealing damage with the characters themselves, and the Bloom damage is an afterthought. I recommend Kinich, Farina, Yelan and Baiju. You don't need Nalu, because the Blooms aren't the main source of damage here. Farina gives her buff to everyone, Yelan gives her buff to Kinich, the Dendro Resonance gives the team some elemental mastery, which is good for Blooms, because no one's built for elemental mastery, and the Hydro Resonance is good for giving extra HP to Farina, Yelan and Baiju. It won't be as strong as the teams with Pyro units, and it's definitely not one I recommend for floor 12, but with Bloom being an AoE reaction, it's cool to have a single target variant. What about Hyper Bloom? Again, not taking advantage of his passive, but he's single target and so is Hyper Bloom, so it can work, it just won't be as strong as other Hyper Bloom teams. Let's go with Cookie as the healer and Hyper Bloom trigger. For the other slots, you want at least one of either Xingqiu or Yelan, and then for the final slot, you can either go for a second Hydro or Dendro unit. Xingqiu will apply more Hydro for more Blooms, Yelan gives Kinich a buff from a passive and deals more damage than Xingqiu at the expense of Hydro application, Emily can give us single target damage, and Nahida can give us some AoE coverage, and either of them can hold Deepwood. You could even give Cookie Deepwood if you wanted to, or if you're running a purely attack scaling team like Kinich, Emily and Xingqiu, you could give it Tenacity of a Millilith to buff the team's attack. Last we'll look at Quicken teams. With you not triggering Kinich's passive, the one where you use his skill against opponents affected by Burning or Burgeon to get more Night Soul points, you'll be using his skill less often. However, with us having Quicken in the team, when he uses his skill it will hit harder than it does in Burning and Burgeon teams. You have a lot of options between Fischl for single target damage, Beidou for AoE, Lisa for defense shred, Yai Miko who you could build on Emblem or Golden Troop, or Kujo Sara cause your waifu over meta. For sustain, I recommend either Baiju for the spread buff from his passive, or if you don't have him, you could go Karara who we all just got for free. And if you have a C6, she gives the team elemental damage. Another advantage of the team is that your Electro units could potentially contribute more damage than Xiangling, given the fact Xiangling won't be vaping. Bear in mind though, if you want the best spread DPS, it's going to be Alhaitham, not Kinich. Overall, Kinich is a decent character at C0. You'll get more damage in Burning and Burgeon teams, but he's not unusable outside of them. He's just weaker than someone like Alhaitham for spread teams. I dropped a similar guide for Mualani, and I'm going to be dropping one soon for Kachina as well as other pre-Natlan videos. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in them, and take it easy.